The weekend sunshine painted everything in warm golden hues as it filtered through the old oak trees surrounding Riverside Park. Children's laughter echoed across the playground, while families spread blankets on the grass for afternoon picnics. The gentle splash of the fountain created a peaceful backdrop to the joyful chaos of a perfect Saturday afternoon. Sophie Lane sat alone on her favorite bench near the fountain, a worn paperback novel open in her lap. At 32, she had the quiet presence of someone who had learned to find contentment in solitary moments. Her shoulder-length brown hair caught the breeze as she turned the pages, occasionally glancing up to watch the families around her with a mixture of longing and resignation. Sophie had come to the park every weekend for the past 3 years, drawn by the sounds of happiness that filled spaces she couldn't quite access in her own life. Working as an administrative assistant at a mid-sized accounting firm provided stability but little excitement. Her small apartment across town was comfortable but silent. Her routine was predictable but lonely. As she reached for her coffee cup, Sophie noticed a small figure sitting alone on a stone bench about 20 feet away. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, sat with her tiny hands folded in her lap, watching the other children play with an expression that seemed far too serious for someone so young. The child had beautiful curly hair that caught the sunlight, and she wore a simple floral dress that looked carefully maintained despite its obvious age. Her small legs swung gently from the bench, not quite reaching the ground, and there was something about her stillness that stood out among all the movement and energy surrounding them. Sophie found herself watching the little girl with growing concern. While other children ran and shouted and claimed their parents' attention, this child sat quietly, as if she was waiting for something that might never come. After several minutes, the little girl seemed to make a decision. She slipped down from her bench and began walking slowly towards Sophie, with the careful steps of someone who had been taught to be polite to strangers, but wasn't quite sure how to begin a conversation. Sophie looked up from her book as the child approached, immediately struck by the intelligence and sadness in the girl's large brown eyes. "Excuse me, ma'am," the little girl said in a voice that was barely above a whisper. She twisted her hands nervously in front of her dress and looked down at her feet before continuing. "I don't have a mama," she said simply, then looked up at Sophie with a directness that was both heartbreaking and hopeful. "Can I spend a day with you?" The words hit Sophie like a physical blow. She stared at the child's face, taking in the carefully composed expression that couldn't quite hide the loneliness underneath. This little girl had just asked for something so simple and so impossible that Sophie felt her chest tighten with unexpected emotion. "Oh, sweetheart," Sophie said softly, setting her book aside and giving the child her complete attention. "What's your name?" "Lily," the girl replied, taking a small step closer to Sophie's bench. "I live with my grandma, but she's taking a nap. She said I could play in the park for a little while." Sophie looked around the playground, searching for any adult who might be supervising Lily from a distance. She saw families engaged with their own children, joggers following the park trails, and couples enjoying romantic walks. But no one who seemed to be watching this solitary little girl. "Lily, that's such a pretty name," Sophie said gently. "Where is your grandma? Is she nearby?" Lily pointed toward a row of apartment buildings visible beyond the park's edge. "She's in the yellow building. She gets very tired, so I try to be quiet and not bother her too much." The matter-of-fact way Lily explained her situation made Sophie's heart ache even more. This child had clearly learned to be independent and considerate beyond her years, probably out of necessity rather than choice. Without really thinking about the implications, Sophie found herself saying, "Would you like to sit with me for a while? I was just reading, but I'd much rather have someone to talk to." Lily's face transformed with a smile so radiant that Sophie felt something shift fundamentally in her chest. It was as if a door she hadn't even known was closed had suddenly swung wide open. "Really?" Lily asked, climbing up onto the bench beside Sophie, with the careful movements of a child who had been taught to be respectful of other people's space. "Really," Sophie confirmed, closing her book and turning to face this unexpected companion who had just asked for the things Sophie had been unconsciously offering to the world for years. Someone to care. Have you ever met someone whose simple request changed everything you thought you knew about yourself? And where are you watching this story? Maybe taking a break from your own busy day? Let us know in the comments. Because sometimes the most important moments find us when we least expect them. Sophie's journey to that park bench had been shaped by a series of small compromises that had gradually led her away from the life she had once imagined for herself. Growing up, she had dreamed of becoming an elementary school teacher, inspired by her own third-grade teacher who had made learning feel like magic and had seen potential in every student. During college, Sophie had majored in early childhood education with plans to spend her career helping young minds discover their capabilities and passions. She had volunteered at after-school programs, tutored struggling readers, and spent her summers working at day camps where she developed a natural ability to connect with children who felt overlooked or misunderstood. But life had intervened in ways that required practical decisions over passionate ones. Her father's sudden death during her senior year had left her mother struggling with both grief and financial instability. Sophie had graduated on schedule but postponed her teaching certification to take an immediate job that could help support her family. The administrative position at Morrison & Associates had been intended as a temporary solution, a way to earn steady income while she figured out how to return to her original career path. But temporary solutions had a way of becoming permanent when they provided security during uncertain times. Years had passed faster than Sophie had anticipated. Her mother had remarried and moved to Florida, no longer needing Sophie's financial support. Sophie had been promoted twice and now earned a comfortable salary that allowed her to rent a pleasant one-bedroom apartment and save money for a future she couldn't quite envision. But somewhere along the way, Sophie had stopped actively pursuing her teaching dreams. The longer she stayed in the administrative world, the more difficult it seemed to make the transition back to education. Her student teaching credentials had expired. The confidence she had once felt about working with children had faded through lack of practice. Sophie's social life had similarly stagnated. Most of her college friends had moved away or gotten married and started families. Her coworkers were friendly, but focused on their own lives outside the office. Dating had been a series of disappointing encounters with men who seemed to be looking for someone different from who she actually was. The loneliness had crept up gradually, so slowly that Sophie hadn't fully recognized it until it had become a constant background presence in her life. She went to work, came home, watched television, read books, and slept. Weekends involved grocery shopping, household chores, and solitary activities that filled time without necessarily providing fulfillment. But Sophie had maintained one connection to her original dreams. Every Saturday morning, she volunteered at the public library's Children's Story Hour. For 1 hour each week, she got to sit in a circle with groups of young children and read picture books with all the enthusiasm and dramatic flair she had once planned to bring to her own classroom. The children who attended Story Hour loved Sophie's animated reading style and her ability to answer their questions with patience and genuine interest. Parents often commented on how much their kids looked forward to Miss Sophie's sessions, but these brief encounters only highlighted what was missing from the rest of Sophie's week. After Story Hour each Saturday, Sophie would walk through the park on her way home, drawn by the sounds of family life that surrounded her, but remained just out of reach. She had developed a routine of sitting on the same bench with a book, telling herself she was simply enjoying the fresh air and sunshine. But really, Sophie was observing the kind of life she had always imagined having. She watched mothers push their children on swings, fathers teach their kids to ride bicycles, and families share picnic lunches on blankets spread under shady trees. These scenes filled her with a longing she didn't quite know how to address. Sophie had considered many times whether she should try to return to teaching or find other ways to work with children more regularly. But making such a significant career change felt overwhelming when she was already struggling with the isolation that had gradually settled over her life. She had also thought about dating more seriously or joining social groups where she might meet like-minded people. But most of her attempts at expanding her social circle had felt forced and unsuccessful. Sophie was naturally introverted, and the aggressive socializing that seemed required for meeting new people as an adult exhausted rather than energized her. So she had settled into a pattern of quiet contentment that wasn't quite happiness, but wasn't exactly unhappiness either. Sophie told herself that not everyone was meant to have a big, dramatic life filled with romance and adventure. Some people were meant to find satisfaction in small pleasures and simple routines. But sitting in the park each weekend, surrounded by the evidence of connections she didn't have, Sophie sometimes felt like she was watching life happen to other people, while her own remained suspended in a state of perpetual waiting. The volunteer work at the library had become both a source of joy and a reminder of everything she had given up. When she read stories to groups of eager children, Sophie felt most like herself. But when the hour ended and the families departed for the rest of their weekends together, she was left with the echo of what her life might have been like if she had made different choices. This was the emotional landscape Sophie inhabited when Lily approached her bench with a request that would challenge everything she had accepted about the limits of her own life. What began as a simple conversation between strangers quickly evolved into something that felt surprisingly natural and right. Sophie found herself genuinely curious about Lily's perspective on the world, while Lily seemed to blossom under the focused attention of an adult who had time to really listen to her thoughts and observations. "What's your favorite thing to do at the park?" Sophie asked as they walked slowly along the path that wound around the central fountain. Lily considered the question seriously as she seemed to approach everything. "I like to watch the ducks," she said, pointing toward the small pond at the far end of the park. "They don't seem lonely, even when they're by themselves." The comment struck Sophie as remarkably perceptive for someone so young. As they approached the pond, she watched Lily's face light up at the sight of several mallards gliding across the water's surface. "Do you come here often?" Sophie asked. "Every weekend when Grandma feels okay," Lily replied. "Sometimes she comes with me, but usually she needs to rest. She says the fresh air is good for me, and I should learn to be independent." Sophie heard both pride and sadness in Lily's voice as she explained her routine. This child had clearly been taught to take care of herself in ways that seemed both admirable and heartbreaking. "Would you like to get some ice cream?" Sophie suggested, noticing the small vendor cart near the playground area. "My treat." Lily's eyes widened with excitement, but she hesitated. "Are you sure? Grandma says I shouldn't ask people for things." "You didn't ask," Sophie pointed out gently. "I offered. There's a big difference." They walked to the ice cream cart together, where Lily studied the available options with the serious concentration of someone making an important decision. She finally chose a modest vanilla cone, which she thanked Sophie for multiple times. As they found a shady spot to sit and enjoy their ice cream, Sophie found herself asking questions about Lily's life with growing interest rather than simple politeness. Lily explained that her grandmother had been taking care of her since she was very small, though she didn't remember much about the time before living with Grandma. "Grandma gets tired a lot," Lily said matter-of-factly. "The doctor says her heart is weak, so I try to help by being quiet and not causing trouble." Sophie felt her chest tighten as she imagined this thoughtful little girl tiptoeing around her own home, trying to be invisible to avoid burdening the only family she had. "What do you like to do when you're at home?" Sophie asked. "I have coloring books and some picture books Grandma got me from the library," Lily said. "I practice reading them out loud to my stuffed animals. Grandma says reading is the most important thing to learn." The mention of reading gave Sophie an idea. "There's a nice little cafe near here that has coloring supplies and children's books. Would you like to go there for a while?" Lily nodded eagerly, and they made their way to Harmony Cafe, a family-friendly spot that Sophie had walked past many times but never entered. The owner, a friendly woman named Maria, immediately welcomed them and set up Lily with a selection of crayons and coloring pages at a child-sized table near the window. As Lily colored with intense focus, Sophie found herself studying the child's careful movements and patient attention to detail. There was something about Lily's quiet contentment that reminded Sophie of herself as a child, the way she had learned to find satisfaction in solitary activities and to appreciate small kindnesses from adults. "She's a lovely child," Maria commented as she brought Sophie a coffee. "Very polite and well-behaved. Is she your daughter?" The question caught Sophie off guard. Looking at Lily bent over her coloring page, she felt a sudden, powerful wish that the answer could be yes. "No," Sophie said quietly. "We just met today at the park." Maria raised her eyebrows but didn't press for more information. "Well, she seems very comfortable with you. Some people just have a natural way with children." As the afternoon progressed, Sophie and Lily settled into an easy rhythm of conversation and comfortable silence. Lily shared stories about her stuffed animals and asked thoughtful questions about Sophie's work. Sophie found herself talking more freely than she had in months, describing her love of books and her weekend routine in ways that made her simple life sound more interesting than she usually thought it was. When Lily finished her coloring page, a detailed picture of a garden filled with flowers and butterflies, she carefully tore it from the book and offered it to Sophie. "This is for you," Lily said shyly, "to remember our day together." Sophie accepted the drawing with genuine gratitude, touched by the gift and by the assumption that this day would be worth remembering. "Thank you, Lily. This is beautiful. I'll keep it somewhere special." As the sun began to set and the cafe started to fill with dinner customers, Sophie realized that she and Lily had spent nearly the entire afternoon together without either of them seeming to notice the passage of time. For the first time in years, Sophie had experienced the kind of meaningful connection she had been unconsciously seeking. And judging by Lily's reluctance to leave when it was time to return to the park, the feeling seemed to be mutual. As the golden hour light began to fade across the park, Sophie and Lily made their way back toward the bench where they had first met. Sophie felt a growing reluctance to end this unexpected day, but she knew that Lily's grandmother would likely be wondering where she was. "I should probably get you home," Sophie said gently as they approached the area where Lily had pointed out her apartment building earlier. Lily nodded with obvious disappointment, but didn't protest. "Thank you for spending the day with me," she said, with the formal politeness that seemed to be her default mode with adults. "It was the best day I've had in a really long time." The simple honesty of Lily's statement made Sophie's heart ache. She couldn't imagine how lonely this child's daily life must be if a random afternoon with a stranger constituted such a highlight. "It was a wonderful day for me too," Sophie replied, and meant it completely. As they walked toward the yellow apartment building Lily had indicated, an elderly woman emerged from the front entrance, moving slowly with the aid of a walker. Even from a distance, Sophie could see the relief on the woman's face when she spotted Lily approaching. "Lily, sweetheart, there you are," the woman called out, her voice carrying both affection and gentle concern. "I was starting to worry." Lily ran ahead to meet her grandmother, immediately taking a position beside her to offer support without being asked. The practiced nature of this assistance suggested it was a well-established routine between them. Sophie approached more slowly, uncertain about how to explain her presence or whether her involvement in Lily's afternoon would be welcome. "Grandma, this is Miss Sophie," Lily announced with obvious pride. "She spent the whole day with me at the park, and we had ice cream and colored pictures and talked about books." The elderly woman, who introduced herself as Margaret Chen, studied Sophie with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Sophie had expected suspicion or concern about a stranger spending time with her granddaughter, but instead she saw something that looked like profound gratitude. "My dear," Margaret said, reaching out to take Sophie's hand with surprising strength, "thank you for giving this child such a special day. I haven't seen her smile like this in months." Sophie felt herself blushing under Margaret's direct gaze. "Lily is wonderful company. We had a lovely afternoon together." Margaret's eyes filled with tears that she didn't try to hide. "You have to understand, I do my best for her, but I'm not always able to give her the attention and activities that a young child needs. My health isn't what it used to be, and some days just getting through our basic routine is all I can manage." The honesty in Margaret's voice made Sophie realize how much courage it must have taken for this proud woman to admit her limitations, especially to a stranger. "She's clearly very well cared for," Sophie said sincerely. "Lily is one of the most thoughtful and well-behaved children I've ever met." "Would you?" Margaret began, then paused as if reconsidering whether to make the request she was contemplating. "Would you consider visiting us sometime? Perhaps joining us for dinner? I think Lily would be thrilled, and honestly, it would mean so much to me to see her have more opportunities for the kind of interaction she had with you today." Sophie felt her heart skip at the invitation. The prospect of seeing Lily again filled her with unexpected joy, but she also felt uncertain about inserting herself into their family dynamic. "I wouldn't want to impose," Sophie said carefully. "I'm sure you have your own routines, and I don't want to complicate things." "You wouldn't be complicating anything," Margaret assured her. "You'd be adding something we've been missing." Lily had been listening to this conversation with growing excitement. "Miss Sophie, would you really come to our house? I could show you my books and my stuffed animals, and we could color more pictures together." Looking at Lily's hopeful expression and Margaret's genuine warmth, Sophie felt the same impulse that had led her to offer companionship to a lonely child at the park. This family had space in their lives for the kind of connection she had been seeking without realizing it. "I would love to visit," Sophie said. "When would be a good time?" They made plans for Sophie to join them for Sunday dinner the following weekend. As she walked back to her car, Sophie carried Lily's carefully colored drawing and Margaret's phone number, along with a sense of anticipation she hadn't felt in years. That evening, Sophie found herself unable to concentrate on her usual weekend routine of television and reading. Instead, she kept thinking about Lily's serious brown eyes and Margaret's grateful smile. She replayed conversations from their afternoon together and found herself planning questions she wanted to ask Lily about her books and her thoughts about the world. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Sophie had something specific to look forward to beyond her regular obligations. The prospect of becoming part of Lily and Margaret's lives, even in a small way, had awakened possibilities she had stopped allowing herself to imagine. As she placed Lily's drawing on her refrigerator door, Sophie realized that this one unexpected day had already begun to change something fundamental about how she saw her own life and what it might become. 3 weeks after that first Sunday dinner, Sophie received a phone call that would test the depth of her growing attachment to Lily and Margaret in ways she had never anticipated. "Sophie, dear, this is Margaret," came the shaky voice through her phone on a Wednesday evening. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I'm at the hospital, and I don't know who else to call." Sophie felt her stomach drop as she heard the fear and exhaustion in Margaret's voice. Over the past few weeks, their Sunday dinners had become the highlight of Sophie's week, and she had grown to care deeply about both Margaret and Lily. "What happened?" Sophie asked, already reaching for her car keys. "I had chest pains this afternoon and had to call an ambulance," Margaret explained. "The doctors are running tests, and they want to keep me overnight for observation. Lily is with Mrs. Patterson from downstairs, but she's scared and confused, and I hate having to burden the neighbors." Sophie was already walking toward her car as Margaret continued. "I know this is asking too much, and we haven't known each other very long, but would there be any way you could take Lily for the night? She's asking for you, and I think having someone familiar with her would help both of us worry less." "Of course," Sophie said without hesitation. "I'll come get her right now. Which hospital are you at?" 20 minutes later, Sophie was knocking on Mrs. Patterson's door to collect a very subdued Lily, who clutched a small overnight bag and her favorite stuffed rabbit with obvious anxiety. "Is Grandma going to be okay?" Lily asked as they walked to Sophie's car. Sophie chose honesty over false reassurance. "The doctors are taking very good care of her, and she's going to stay at the hospital tonight so they can make sure she feels better. But she wanted you to stay with me so you wouldn't have to worry about her while she rests." Lily nodded seriously, but Sophie could see tears threatening in her eyes. Once they arrived at Sophie's apartment, Lily looked around with curious interest despite her worry. Sophie's small space suddenly felt more alive with the child's presence, and she found herself seeing her home through Lily's eyes. "You have so many books," Lily observed, studying Sophie's overstuffed bookshelves. "I love to read," Sophie explained. "Would you like me to read you a story before bed?" They spent the next hour curled up on Sophie's couch, reading picture books and talking quietly about Lily's concerns about her grandmother. Sophie found herself drawing on instincts she hadn't used since her college education courses, helping Lily express her fears while providing comfort and reassurance. As Sophie prepared a makeshift bed for Lily on her living room couch, she realized that having this child in her home felt completely natural. Everything from preparing a simple dinner to establishing a bedtime routine seemed to flow easily, as if she had been taking care of children all her life. The next morning brought more challenging news. Margaret had suffered a mild heart attack and would need to stay in the hospital for several days while doctors adjusted her medication and monitored her condition. "Would you be able to keep Lily a little longer?" Margaret asked when Sophie brought Lily to the hospital for a brief visit. "I know this is a huge imposition, and I'll understand if you can't manage it." Sophie looked at Lily, who was holding her hand tightly while trying to be brave during the intimidating hospital visit. "It's not an imposition at all," Sophie said firmly. "Lily can stay with me as long as you need her to." What followed were 4 days that would fundamentally change Sophie's understanding of what she wanted from her life. Taking care of Lily required her to request time off from work, rearrange her schedule, and take on responsibilities she had never experienced before. But rather than feeling burdened, Sophie felt more purposeful and energized than she had in years. She walked Lily to school each morning and picked her up each afternoon. She helped with homework, prepared meals that appealed to a 6-year-old's preferences, and established routines that made Lily feel secure, despite the disruption in her normal life. In the evenings, they would visit Margaret at the hospital, where Sophie watched the older woman's relief and gratitude as she saw how well Lily was being cared for. "You're a natural at this," Margaret told Sophie one evening, as they watched Lily color a get-well card at the small table in Margaret's hospital room. "I can see how much happier she is when you're around." Sophie had noticed it too. Lily seemed more talkative, more playful, and more confident when they were together. But more surprisingly, Sophie had discovered that she felt more like herself when she was caring for Lily than she had in any other area of her adult life. On the 4th night, as Sophie tucked Lily into her makeshift bed, Lily looked up at her with serious eyes. "Miss Sophie, when Grandma comes home, will you still want to see me?" The question revealed fears that Lily had been carrying throughout their time together. Sophie sat down on the edge of the couch and took Lily's small hand in hers. "Lily, spending these days with you has been one of the best experiences of my whole life," Sophie said honestly. "I hope we can keep being part of each other's lives for a very long time. Even though I'm not really your family." Sophie felt her heart constrict at the longing in Lily's voice. "You know what I think? I think families can be made in lots of different ways. Sometimes people who care about each other become family even if they didn't start out related." When Margaret was finally released from the hospital, she had a serious conversation with Sophie about what the future might hold. "My doctor says I need to be more realistic about my limitations," Margaret admitted. "Lily needs more stability and care than I can consistently provide on my own. But she also needs me, and I'm not ready to consider more drastic changes to our living situation." Sophie took a deep breath and made a suggestion that surprised even her with its boldness. "What if I helped more regularly? Not just occasional visits, but actually sharing in Lily's care. I could move closer to your neighborhood, help with daily routines, and be available when you need support." Margaret's eyes filled with tears of relief. "Are you sure that's what you want?" Sophie looked at Lily, who was listening to this conversation with barely contained hope, and realized that she had never been more certain of anything in her life. "I want to be part of Lily's life in whatever way makes sense for all of us," Sophie said. "She's taught me something about myself that I didn't even know I was missing." 1 year later, the sound of Lily's laughter filled the small garden behind the duplex that Sophie and Lily now called home. Margaret lived in the adjoining unit, close enough to maintain her important role in Lily's life, while allowing Sophie to provide the daily care and stability that both child and grandmother needed. The arrangement had evolved naturally over the months following Margaret's hospitalization. Sophie had found a part-time position at the neighborhood elementary school, finally returning to her educational roots in a way that allowed her to maintain her commitment to Lily's care. Working at Lily's school meant they could share the same schedule, and Sophie could be involved in Lily's academic and social development. On this particular Saturday afternoon, Sophie knelt beside Lily in their small vegetable garden, watching with satisfaction as the 7-year-old carefully watered the tomato plants they had planted together in the spring. "Look, Miss Sophie, Mama Sophie," Lily said, still adjusting to the new title they had chosen together. "The flowers are turning into actual tomatoes, just like you said they would." Sophie had become Mama Sophie by Lily's own request, a designation that honored both Sophie's role in her daily life and Margaret's continued importance as Grandma Maggie. The arrangement felt natural to all three of them, creating a family structure that met everyone's needs without forcing anyone to give up important relationships. "You've taken such good care of them," Sophie replied, admiring Lily's patient attention to their small garden. "Plants grow better when someone loves them every day." Through the screen door, they could hear Margaret preparing lunch in her own kitchen, humming softly as she moved around with the improved energy that had come from reduced stress and better medical management of her heart condition. The three of them shared most meals together, alternating between the two units depending on the day's schedule and everyone's preferences. Margaret remained actively involved in Lily's homework supervision and bedtime stories, while Sophie handled the logistics of school, activities, and daily care that required more physical energy. "Mama Sophie, Lily said, settling beside her in the dirt with the comfortable familiarity of someone who felt completely secure in her place in the world. Do you remember when I asked you at the park if I could spend a day with you? Sophie smiled at the memory of that afternoon that had changed both their lives so completely. I remember thinking you were the bravest little girl I had ever met. I wasn't being brave, Lily said seriously. I was just really lonely, and you look like someone who might understand. Sophie considered this observation, struck by the wisdom of it. What made you think I would understand? Lily thought for a moment, absently pulling small weeds from around their plants. You were sitting by yourself, but you weren't looking at your phone or trying to look busy. You were just watching families and looking kind of sad. I thought maybe you wanted to be part of a family too. The accuracy of Lily's childhood intuition never ceased to amaze Sophie. This perceptive little girl had somehow recognized a kindred spirit across the park and had possessed the courage to reach out for the connection they both needed. That evening, as Sophie read Lily's bedtime story, while Margaret listened from the comfortable chair in the corner of Lily's bedroom, Sophie reflected on how completely her life had been transformed by one child's simple request. She had gone from living in isolation to being part of a loving, unconventional family. Her work now felt meaningful and connected to her values. Her days were filled with purpose, laughter, and the kind of deep contentment she had stopped believing was possible. Sometimes, Sophie said softly as Lily drifted off to sleep, a smile from someone who needs what you have to give can show you exactly where your heart belongs. Margaret nodded from her chair, understanding the profound truth in Sophie's words. They had all found their way to each other through loss and need, but what they had built together was sustained by love and choice. Do you believe that a single moment of courage can change everything? Please subscribe to Hidden Heroine, where we celebrate the beautiful ways people find each other and create the families their hearts were meant to hold.